It was just another ordinary Saturday. I woke up early, eager to spend some time working on my pet project, a 1969 Pontiac GTO. That car was my pride and joy. I was in the garage, polishing up the fender, when my wife came in to join me. Jessica Miller, or just Jess to me, is my beautiful wife of 16 years. We've known each other for 17. She's about 5 feet 6 inches and weighs around 130 pounds, though like most women, she'd never admit to that. Not that I cared, it didn't make a difference to me. At 37, she was still perfect in my eyes. Her long black hair and those deep blue eyes grabbed my heart the first time I saw her. She works as a secretary at a large law firm. As for me, I'm Tyler Miller, but everyone just calls me Ty. I'm 39 now, carrying a little extra weight, and my hairline is making a slow retreat, but I'm still holding my own in the looks department. Our daughter, Allison, who's 16, looks so much like her mom that sometimes it feels like I'm seeing double. And yeah, I know you're doing the math, Allison came along 3 months before we got married. But that was planned. We were both over the moon when we found out she was on the way. That morning, as Jess came into the garage, she was already dressed for the day. I figured she was getting ready for her usual Saturday shopping run. Hey, babe. What brings you out to the man cave? Planning to get wild on the hood of my car? I joked, flashing her a grin. But Jess didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at me and said, Ty, I need to talk to you. I really hope you can be as understanding as you've always been these past 17 years. Sure thing, honey. What's on your mind? I replied, not looking up as I kept polishing the car. She hesitated, then dropped the bombshell. Ty, I've fallen in love with someone else. At first, I chuckled, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. Alright, what's the punchline? But she didn't crack a smile or say another word. I stopped what I was doing and turned to face her. She stood there, just staring at me, a single tear sliding down her cheek. You're serious, aren't you? I asked, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. She nodded, and I suddenly felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. I couldn't find my voice. My thoughts were racing, but I was speechless. Was it something I did, Jess? Did I push you away somehow? No, Ty, it wasn't you, she said quietly. I wasn't searching for this, it just happened. We've been seeing each other since April. And yes, before you ask, we've been intimate. I couldn't keep moving forward with our plans without telling you the truth, and asking for a divorce. I love him, and he loves me. I'm so sorry. You'll get the papers this afternoon. I've already packed my things, and I'll be moving out today. Her words hit me like a freight train, and I struggled to make sense of it all. Slowly, anger started to build. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice tight with frustration. You've been seeing someone else for 4 months, sleeping with him, and now you're leaving me and our family for him. Does that about cover it? No, Ty. I still love you, just not the same way. You've been a great husband and father, but yes, I've been with him, and I regret not telling you sooner. He's very persuasive, and I gave in. I'm sorry. I shook my head in disbelief. I don't need to hear the details, Jess. I don't care how great he is in bed. I know how much you enjoy sex, so I doubt he had to try too hard to get you between the sheets. She started to cry, and I knew I'd hit a nerve, but I wasn't about to let up. Does Allison know? And where are you planning to stay after you leave today? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. I thought we could talk to her together, Jess said through her tears. I want her to understand that sometimes these things happen, and we'll both still be a part of her life. I stared at her, feeling my anger rise. Oh no, my soon-to-be ex-wife, this is your mess to clean up, not mine. You'll be the one to explain to Allison why you're ripping our family apart, and where exactly you think she's going to live. She's 16, almost 17, old enough to make her own decisions. She's just as beautiful as you are. Do you honestly think I'm going to let her live under the same roof as some stranger? You'd better think again. Do I know this guy? What's his name? I asked, my voice edged with frustration. Jess hesitated for a moment before answering. He's a new attorney at the firm. We hit it off the moment we met. He loves me, and I love him. He wants to marry me. You don't need to know his name right now. Oh, really? I shot back. Well, I'm sure the managing partners will happily fill me in once I file my lawsuit. Think it through, Jess. I can't make you stay, and I sure don't want someone who doesn't want me. But I'm pretty certain your company has a policy against office romances like this. My lawyer can get all the details. So, I'll ask again, what's his name? Please, Ty, just let this happen without making it worse for both of us, she pleaded. We could lose our jobs. And that's supposed to be my problem? I snapped, my frustration boiling over. In the words of that Japanese admiral after Pearl Harbor, you've awakened a sleeping giant. Guess what, Jess? You just bombed my Pearl Harbor. I won't be holding back. She finally broke down. His name is Brandon. Brandon Turner. I nodded, barely keeping my anger in check. Good to know. Just so you're aware, Brandon Turner's life is about to implode. Messing around with married women and tearing families apart is one of the worst things you can do. There are going to be consequences, Jess. And no matter what happens next, you've destroyed everything I thought we had. We're done. As I turned to head back to the house, Allison's friend pulled up, dropping her off from a shopping trip. I stopped and looked back at Jess. Your daughter's here. It's time to tell her she's moving out today. You've planned this far enough in advance, right? Allison got out of the car with a bright smile on her face. Hey, Dad. Looks like you've been working on that sweet car you promised I'd drive one day. I forced a weak laugh and replied, Hey, kiddo. Your mom's got something she needs to talk to you about. I'll stay out of it unless she tries to twist the truth or put this on me. Believe me, this mess isn't my fault. I turned to Jess. Your turn. Jess's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. Honey, I'm leaving your dad. I've fallen in love with someone else. After the divorce, I plan to marry him. You need to pack your things because we're moving out today. I watched as Allison's face went from confusion to disbelief. She glanced back and forth between us, her smile fading. Okay, she said slowly, if this is a joke, it's not funny. She stared at Jess, then back at me. Dad, what's happening? This woman looks like Mom, but I don't recognize her. Tell me this isn't real. I sighed, the weight of the truth too heavy to hide from her. It's real, kiddo. Your mom is planning to be with this new guy tonight at his place. She expects you to pack up and go live with her and him. So, I guess you'd better start getting your things together. Allison's expression shifted to fury. She exploded. Hold on. Are you serious? We're not going anywhere. Mom, did you really think I'd just go along with this? Have you completely lost it? Allison, you will not talk to me like that. I'm still your mother, Jess snapped. No, Allison shot back, her voice shaking with anger. I don't know what happened to my real mom, but whoever you are, you're definitely not her. I'm not going anywhere with you. She turned to me, tears brimming in her eyes. Dad, please tell me I don't have to go with her. I placed a hand on her shoulder and said, Honey, your mom dropped this on me just a few hours ago. She says she's fallen in love with one of her coworkers and wants a divorce. They've been involved for the last 4 months. I've already told her I'm going to sue her employer and deal with her lover. Your mom and I are finished. Just as I was about to say more, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young man, maybe in his 20s, standing there. "Are you Tyler Miller?" he asked. I nodded. He quickly snapped a picture of me, handed over an envelope, and said, "You've been served." Allison, still standing nearby, witnessed the entire exchange. She looked back at me and then broke down, saying, "I can't believe this is really happening. You selfish, home-wrecking witch. I hate you." Allison screamed as she bolted to her room, slamming the door hard behind her. I turned to Jess, keeping my voice steady. "Well, that didn't quite go the way you were hoping, did it? And I doubt Allison's going to be packing up to join you today. Why don't you just gather your things and leave? I'm sure your new man is waiting on you. I'll be canceling your credit cards, cell phone, and car insurance today. Your car's in your name, so that's your problem now. And considering Allison's age, I don't think any court is going to make her live with you and your future husband if she doesn't want to. I think we've said all we need to say. Thanks for the last 16 years. Goodbye, Jess." Jess seemed stunned by my response, like she hadn't expected me to be so firm. I turned and walked back to the shop. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway, tires screeching as she sped off down the street. It was the final signal that our life together had come to an end. Not long after, I looked up and saw Allison standing in the doorway of the shop, tears streaming down her face. I went over to her, wrapping my arms around her as she sobbed into my chest. I knew there would be plenty more tears before either of us would start feeling okay again. Even through all the hurt, I wasted no time. I hired an attorney and started the process of responding to Jess's divorce petition. I also filed claims of infidelity and began a lawsuit against her employer. I wasn't expecting much from the lawsuit itself, but I figured the negative attention would push the firm into taking action. Sure enough, they fired Brandon Turner the day after they got served. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Turner, and he was fuming. He went on, ranting about what he planned to do to me. But I wasn't interested in hearing his threats. I cut him off mid-sentence. "You know what, Turner? You and Jess deserve each other. It won't be long before you're cheating on her. We both know it. People like you only bring misery wherever they go. So, when's the big day for you two? Maybe I'll throw a congratulations, you wrecked everything party." We still had 60 days left before the divorce would be finalized. I kept the house since Allison had chosen to stay with me. She barely spoke to her mom now, which I totally understood. Jess and Turner were apparently in a rush to get married, planning to tie the knot the week after the divorce was finalized. Nothing says true love quite like racing to the altar. 2 weeks before the divorce was set to be finalized, I got a call from a police officer. "Mr. Miller, is your wife Jessica Miller?" he asked. "My soon-to-be ex-wife, yes." "Is there a problem, officer?" The tone of the officer's voice shifted to something more serious. "Mrs. Miller has been involved in a serious car accident. She's currently at County General Hospital. She's alive but has sustained significant injuries." I asked, "Has her fiancé been notified?" The officer paused for a moment before responding. "Mr. Miller, Brandon Turner was driving the vehicle. He died at the scene." "Was he her fiancé?" "Yes," I said quietly. "They were planning to get married as soon as our divorce was final in 2 weeks." "I see," the officer replied. "Thank you. I'll head to the hospital now." When I got to the hospital, the staff informed me that Jess was still in surgery. Since we were still technically married, they said the doctor would update me once she was out of surgery and in recovery. I grabbed a soda from a vending machine and sat down to wait. I called Allison to let her know what had happened. Even though things between her and her mom had been rough, she was still worried. Because we were still legally married for another 2 weeks, Jess was still covered by my health insurance. I was in the middle of filling out some paperwork when the doctor entered the waiting room, followed by 2 police officers. "Mr. Miller?" the doctor asked. I stood up. "Yes, I'm Tyler Miller." "How is she?" The doctor walked toward me, his face serious. "She's in recovery now. There were several complications we had to manage," the doctor began. "Mr. Miller, while treating her injuries, we discovered that she had been shot. She has gunshot wounds to her right side and her thigh, just above the knee. On top of that, the accident caused blunt trauma to her chest, ribs, and abdomen. I'm sorry, but the baby didn't make it." My head spun. "Wait, what? Shot? Pregnant? Baby?" I stammered, completely blindsided. I didn't even know she was pregnant. "How far along was she?" The doctor continued. "From what we could tell, she was around 12 weeks. There was severe internal bleeding, both from the gunshot wounds and the crash. She also has 2 broken ribs, a compound fracture in her left leg where the bone pierced the skin, and a broken ankle. We've inserted plates and screws in both. The bullets have been removed, and they're now with the police." He paused before adding, "With rehab, she should recover, though she'll likely have a limp. The other injuries, like the lacerations, weren't as serious. She'll be here for about a week, and then she'll need at least 8 to 10 weeks in a cast. The leg will eventually heal, but the gunshot wounds caused soft tissue damage. We'll move her to a regular room once she wakes up." "Thanks, doctor," I mumbled, still trying to process the flood of information. 2 police officers approached next, introducing themselves as Officer Cody Erickson and Officer Miranda Cross. "Mr. Miller, can we speak with you for a moment?" Officer Erickson asked. I nodded. "Of course. What's this about her being shot?" "As far as I know, Jess didn't have any enemies. We're in the middle of a divorce, but I'd never want her hurt." "Do you own a gun, Mr. Miller?" Erickson asked. "Yeah, a Sig Sauer," I answered. "It's locked up in my safe at home. We'll need to take a look at it." "Did you know Brandon Turner?" Officer Cross inquired. "No, I never met him." "And yeah, you can check the gun," I replied. "Am I a suspect?" "No one's ruled out yet," Cross said. "You have reasons to be upset, but we're going to investigate thoroughly." "I understand," I sighed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. But I had no idea any of this was going on, especially the pregnancy. The officers followed Allison and me home, where I handed them the gun. Afterward, Officer Cross shared more details. There were 4 bullet holes in Turner's car. 2 hit your wife, 1 lodged near her head, and the 4th killed Turner instantly. The weapon used was a .40 caliber, not a 9mm. All I could think was, what kind of mess has Jess gotten herself into? Later, I called her parents, hoping they'd be willing to take her in once she was discharged. We hadn't spoken since this whole disaster began, and I had no doubt Jess had shared her own version of events with them. On the drive back, Allison quietly asked, "What happened, Dad?" "They were shot while driving," I explained. "Turner was killed instantly, and the crash caused your mom's broken leg and ankle. And, Allison, she was pregnant. The baby didn't survive." Allison took in the news without a word. After a moment, I added gently, "When we see her, no matter what you're feeling, be kind. She's going to be devastated when she finds out about Turner and the baby." Allison nodded solemnly. "I understand, Dad." We returned to the hospital and made our way to Jess's room. She was lying there with an IV in her arm and an oxygen tube in her nose. Her left leg was propped up on pillows, wrapped heavily from her knee down to her toes, and her right thigh was bandaged as well. Both her eyes were swollen and bruised, and a large bandage covered part of her head. Seeing her like that, I felt a strange mix of pity and helplessness wash over me. As we entered, her eyes slowly fluttered open. She looked at us, still groggy from the anesthesia. "Hi, Ty, she whispered weakly, her voice rough. Did anyone catch the number of that bus? What happened? I can't remember much. She tried to laugh but winced in pain. Jess, I said softly, the doctor said you'll be okay in time. Your leg and ankle, though, they're in pretty rough shape. He joked that he had to send someone to the hardware store for extra screws, I said, trying to lift the mood a little. Jess managed a faint smile before her face grew serious again. How's Brandon? She asked, her voice quiet but filled with concern. Allison and I both looked down, avoiding her eyes. Ty, how's Brandon? Please, tell me, she repeated, her voice more urgent this time. I gently took her hand. Jess, Brandon didn't survive the accident. He was killed. I held her hand, and despite everything that had happened between us, I still felt a deep care for her. Tears welled up in her eyes, though she was in too much pain to cry openly. The tears fell silently, and Allison placed her hand on top of mine. For a fleeting moment, it felt like we were a family again, even if just for that brief time. I continued softly, Jess, you and Brandon were both shot. Do you remember anything about it? The crash caused some serious injuries, and you were bleeding internally from both the gunshot wounds and the impact. They couldn't save the baby. I'm so sorry. She lay there, grieving silently, the weight of everything clearly too much for her to bear. Allison and I stayed for about an hour until the medication pulled Jess into a restless sleep. Just as we were leaving, her parents arrived. I spoke with Chelsea, her mom, and explained what I knew. Shot. Pregnant. Chelsea looked at me in disbelief. I nodded. I know, it's a lot to take in. I didn't even know she was pregnant until the doctor told me. And no, before you ask, there's no chance it was mine. Jess cut me off when she started seeing him. I just didn't realize it at the time. I paused before adding, Chelsea, her lover is dead. I hope you and her dad can take her in while she recovers. She was living with him, so she doesn't really have anywhere to go now. I can't take her back, she's done too much damage to our lives. Chelsea sighed heavily. I understand, Ty. It's still hard to believe she tore her family apart like this. But please know, her dad and I still care about you. Thank you, Chelsea, I replied, feeling a bit of relief. That means a lot. Jess spent 8 days in the hospital before being discharged. I watched from the parking lot as her parents picked her up. She looked pale and frail, slumped in a wheelchair with a drain tube sticking out of her side. Both legs were still out of commission, and she seemed so fragile. The police had questioned her, but her memory of the shooting remained unclear, or at least that's what she claimed. Since she left the hospital, I hadn't spoken to her directly. I decided to hold off on finalizing the divorce until she recovered, mainly because she still needed my insurance. Allison visited her a few times at her grandparents' house, but the visits were brief and distant. Jess was starting to feel the full weight of the consequences for what she'd done. 2 months later, on a Saturday afternoon, I had just come in from the shop when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood Jess, leaning on crutches. Hi, Ty. Do you have a minute? I'd like to talk, she said, her voice unsure. Jess hobbled in on her crutches and sat down in the chair she used to love. A faint smile flickered across her face before a tear slid down her cheek. She looked better than she had in the hospital, though the cast on her leg was still hard to miss. What can I do for you, Jess? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Ty, I'm scared, and I want to tell you what I can, she began, her voice wavering. Go ahead, I'm listening. She took a deep breath. It's true. I did fall for Brandon, and we had an affair, but I never wanted to leave you or Allison. I thought it would just end eventually, and I'd come back to you. But things changed when I got pregnant. Brandon wanted the baby, and one night, when you were out of town, he got me drunk and made sure it happened. Once he found out, he wouldn't let me do anything about it. She paused, gathering herself before continuing. Up until then, we used condoms or tried to time things, but none of that mattered anymore. The damage was done. I was living in a fantasy, Ty. Her voice trembled as she spoke, the weight of her choices finally sinking in. When I realized I was pregnant, Brandon threatened to tell you everything if I tried to end it. So, I stayed and planned to have his child. Yes, I loved him, but I loved you too. My only way out was to ask for a divorce. You know the rest. I shook my head. No, I don't. Why were you and Brandon shot? She hesitated, clearly reluctant to explain. I can't tell you everything, Ty. I've already put you, Allison, and my parents in enough danger. The short version is that Brandon was laundering money for some very dangerous people, and he asked Jessam some for himself. That's all I can say. I'm getting my cast off next week, and after that, I'm leaving town. I looked at her seriously. Do they think you have the money? Do you? She dodged the question. I have to go, Ty. Tell Allison goodbye for me. I know she hates me. I've done so much wrong. I hate myself for it. She kissed me lightly on the cheek and hobbled out to the waiting Uber. It would be more than 6 years before I saw Jess again. Our divorce was a distant memory by then. Though I'd dated here and there, I never found that same kind of love, and I'd settled into single life. Meanwhile, Allison had found her soulmate, and her wedding was just 6 weeks away. That day, I had just returned from a drive in my fully restored Pontiac. As I pulled into the driveway, a sleek sedan followed and parked behind me. I watched through the window as the driver stepped out and opened the back door. I saw a pair of legs in heeled sandals emerge, followed by a cane. A woman stepped out slowly, her red hair unmistakable. She wore a knee-length dress, a wide-brimmed hat, and sunglasses. She walked with deliberate care, leaning on her cane, while the driver hovered protectively behind her. I opened the door, studying her until my eyes settled on the scars visible through her stockings. Jess? Is that you? I asked, surprised. Her driver looked confused, but she responded calmly, Tyler, may I come in? I couldn't help but notice the gun holster under the driver's jacket. Sure, Jess, but come in alone. She turned to the driver. Colton, it's fine. Wait in the car. I'm not sure how long I'll be. Yes, Miss Quinn, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Quinn. Is that your married name? No, it's the name I took when the feds put me in witness protection, she explained. I'm Stacy Quinn now. I haven't been married or even dated since I left. I testified against the people who killed Brandon, my baby, and nearly killed me too. They were all convicted and sentenced to life in Supermax. The shooters on death row. I studied her, processing everything. So, it's Tyler now, huh? I always thought I was just Ty, the clueless husband who couldn't keep his wife happy. She lowered her eyes. I deserve that, Ty. I threw away the two most important people in my life, you and Allison. Yes, I thought I loved Brandon, but getting pregnant with his child forced me to make choices, and I chose wrong. I've had 6 years to reflect on it, with the help of counseling. I've kept tabs on you through a few contacts. I'd like to attend Allison's wedding, if she'll let me. Jess, or rather Stacy, I replied, you'll have to talk to her yourself. She and Eric are happy, but I'm not sure she'll recognize you. You've changed, a lot. She smiled faintly. I had a good plastic surgeon. Jesperly, oh, sorry, Stacy, I said, catching myself. You were always beautiful to me, inside and out. For 16 years, you were my everything. You were my queen, and I was your knight in shining armor, until I lost you. I let someone else into our lives, and I was a fool. Brandon swept you off your feet, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I always pictured us growing old together. I looked at her closely, noticing how well she seemed to be doing. Stacy, I can't help but notice, you've done pretty well for yourself. Fancy car, bodyguard. Is that a Bentley? She hesitated, then sighed. It's time you knew the full story. Brandon stole almost $10 million from the people who killed him. He put the money in the Cayman Islands under an alias he created for me. I didn't touch it for the first 2 years, but I've been living off the investments since then, and I've nearly doubled the amount, she continued. I'm wealthy now. The organization came after me, but Colton, my bodyguard, killed 3 of them. He used to work for the U.S. Marshals, assigned to protect me before I hired him full-time. After the trials, I left witness protection, but I kept Colton on. And no, I'm not paying him with anything but money. I haven't been with anyone since Brandon. But I want to change that. I came here to see if there's anything left between us, to find out if we could make our way back to each other. Beneath all this, I'm still Jess. I looked at her carefully. I don't know, Jess. You hurt me in ways you can't imagine. I loved you more than anything, and in one moment, you shattered all of that. How can I trust you now? I don't even know who you are anymore. You show up with a bodyguard, in a luxury car, and tell me you're rich thanks to Brandon's stolen money. Meanwhile, I'm still just Tyler Miller. I don't need millions, and I sure don't want money that came from dirty deals. So I have to ask, why are you really here? She nodded, her expression softening. I understand. That's why I'm willing to give it all up, if that's what it takes. She paused and looked toward the garage. Could I see the Pontiac, Ty? It's in the garage. Let me change, and I'll show it to you, I said. When I came back downstairs, Jess was gone. Confused, I headed into the garage, only to stop dead in my tracks. There she was, stretched out on the hood of my car, her hat and panties hanging from the antenna, her dress pulled up around her hips. She looked at me with a smile. Ty, you once joked about us having fun on the hood of this car. I'm 6 years late, but I'm ready to take you up on that offer. I want to make up for everything I did. You don't have to say you love me. Just take what should have always been yours. I stood there, memories flooding back. Slowly, I walked to the edge of the hood, pulling her toward me as I locked eyes with her. Jess, Stacy, whatever your name is now, tonight, you're mine. I kissed her softly, my lips tracing down her body as she lay across the hood, her breath quickening with every touch. She trembled under me, her fingers gripping the edges of the car as we came together, lost in the moment. The intensity between us grew with each movement, our bodies reconnecting in a way they hadn't in years. It was more than just physical, it was as if we were reliving everything that had been lost. We clung to each other as the moment reached its height, her soft cries filling the garage. For that brief instant, it felt like time had erased the pain, and everything was as it used to be. Breathless, she whispered, "You have no idea how many nights I've fantasized about this. I've worn out so many toys, but nothing compares to feeling you again. Thank you, Ty. I'll go now, leave you to your thoughts. Colton and I are staying at the Marriott." I shook my head. No, Colton can stay at the Marriott. Miss Quinn, however, will be back on this hood at least once more tonight, and in my bed until I say otherwise. Do we understand each other? She looked at me, her eyes wide, almost in disbelief. Thank you, Ty. I kissed the scar on her thigh, the one left by the bullet, before scooping her up and carrying her inside. We made love a few more times that night, taking our time, savoring the moments together. At one point, a thought crossed my mind, wondering if she was still fertile at 43. She must have noticed the distant look in my eyes because she spoke softly. I know what you're thinking, she said quietly. No, I can't get pregnant. The bullet that killed our baby also destroyed my uterus. I had to have a partial hysterectomy, Ty. It was one more thing that crushed me back then. I'm so sorry, Jess. I didn't know. We didn't really talk much before you left, I admitted, guilt creeping into my voice. She sighed. No, we didn't. I suddenly remembered something and glanced at the clock. By the way, isn't Colton still waiting in the car? Her eyes widened in surprise. Oh my God, I completely forgot about Colton. She quickly grabbed her phone, dialing Colton to bring in her bags. Dressed in my robe, she met him at the door. Colton, I won't be needing you for the next couple of weeks, she said. Leave the car. I'll have a rental ready for you at the airport. She handed him a check for $20,000 and added, take a vacation, and call me in 2 weeks. Colton smiled knowingly. You're back, aren't you, Miss Quinn? Jess hesitated before replying, I hope so, Colton, but my name is Jesperly Shaw now. Whatever you say, Miss Quinn, he teased, giving her a playful look before he left. After arranging a taxi to take Colton to the airport, I sat back, still trying to wrap my head around everything. I wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but for now, I was just enjoying reconnecting with Jess, rediscovering each other in ways we hadn't in years. Later, I asked her, are you ready to see Allison yet? She paused, looking conflicted. I don't know, Ty. I've got a lot to make up for, and I don't want to ruin her wedding if she's not ready to see me. As the days passed, we seemed to grow closer, or at least that's how it felt. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she was always whispering on the phone, keeping her conversations private, like she didn't want me to overhear. I reminded myself it wasn't really my business anymore. We weren't married, and for all I knew, she could have other people in her life. Officer Cross stopped by a few times, casually chatting with me about the case. That's when I realized Jess had been lying about the shooters. According to Cross, every one of them was either in prison or on death row. That was mistake number 1, Jess. I also noticed that she always managed to disappear whenever Officer Cross showed up. Cross had a certain charm of her own, and I caught her eyeing me more than once, like she was sizing me up. One day, I overheard Jess on the phone in the other room. Her voice was low, but I caught enough to make out what she was saying. Don't worry, I'm treating him like a king. Keeping him happy in every way possible. He's still pretty good, but you know I only love you. Soon, he'll be eating out of my hand and doing whatever I want. Well, that was interesting. My suspicions had been right. She wasn't here for a romantic reunion or for Allison's wedding. She had a reason, a scheme. I decided to play it cool and figure out what she was really after. The next morning, at work, I called Officers Erickson and Cross, asking if we could meet after hours. We met at a convenience store near my office, and I explained the situation. My ex-wife had come back out of nowhere, and something felt off. Even though the case around her shooting had gone cold, her sudden reappearance had me thinking there might be more to it. That evening, Jess was as captivating as ever, her attention on me constant and unwavering. Regardless of her motives, I wasn't complaining, not yet. I still hadn't told Allison that her mom was back in town. She and Eric were off enjoying their pre-wedding getaway. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Jess broke the silence. Ty, I've been thinking. Maybe we should take a few days for ourselves. What do you say to a trip to the Caymans? We could relax on the beach during the day and enjoy the nights together. What do you think? I raised an eyebrow. That sounds tempting, but why the Caymans? There are plenty of other nice places we could go. She hesitated before answering. Well, there's something I need your help with. Brandon, he stashed some money in a bank there. Since he's gone, I need someone to pretend to be him to get it. You look a lot like him, and I've already had some ID made in his name for you. And there it was, the real reason she'd shown up in my life again. I'm not so sure about that, Jess, I said, my tone shifting. It sounds illegal, and I don't want any part of it. I'm not interested in Brandon's stolen money, and I definitely don't want any trouble with whoever might still be after him. Just as I finished speaking, a man walked into the room, holding what looked like a small shotgun. He aimed it directly at me and ordered us to get dressed, never letting the weapon drop for a second. As we hurried to comply, he spoke directly to Jess. I told you this wasn't going to work. Now we're doing things my way. As he led us downstairs to the garage, the pieces started falling into place. Brandon Lambert, I assume? I asked, connecting the dots. Well done, Jess. You really played me. So, who was the guy in the car? Lambert smirked. He was a double we hired to drive around in my car, acting as me. The plan was simple: I'd pull up beside him, take him out, and then Jess would steer the car into a tree. Officially, Brandon Lambert would be dead. But things didn't go exactly as planned. 2 of my shots hit Jess by mistake, and the car crashed faster than expected, which knocked her out of commission for a while. Still, she identified the body as mine, so it worked, mostly. His tone darkened as he continued. Now I need my money, and you're going to help me get it. I can't show my face, or I'm as good as dead. So, you'll do it for me. I crossed my arms. And what if I refuse? Jess quickly stepped in. Brandon, you need him. You can't hurt him. Lambert nodded but then pointed the gun at her. True, but I don't need you anymore. He turned to me. I know you still care about her. You don't want to see her hurt, do you? If I were you, I'd cooperate. Suddenly, I yelled, "Run, Jess!" She took off, but Lambert fired low. The blast caught her just above the ankle, and she fell, screaming in agony. Blood poured from the wound, and she grabbed at her leg, desperate. She was losing blood fast. I lunged at Lambert, grappling with him for control of the gun. We struggled until my neighbors, who had heard the earlier gunshot, called the police. Lambert broke free and bolted out of the garage, only to run straight into Officers Cross and Erickson. I heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun blast, followed by a single handgun shot. Rushing back to Jess, I grabbed an extension cord and quickly fashioned a tourniquet, wrapping it tightly around her thigh to slow the bleeding. She was in shock, her body shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't help but stare at her leg, it was horrifying. Her foot was barely hanging on by a thin piece of ligament, her shoe still awkwardly clinging to what remained. Officer Cross stormed into the garage. EMS is on the way. Hang in there, Jess. Ty, are you all right? She asked, her voice calm despite the chaos. I nodded, still in shock. Lambert? She shook her head. He's gone. No doubt about it. The scene became a blur of flashing lights, police tape, and news cameras. Crime scene investigators combed through the area for hours. Officer Cross approached me again, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder as I knelt beside Jess, who was being loaded onto a stretcher by the paramedics. It's over, Ty, she said softly. Once we get your statement and finish the paperwork, how about we grab a drink? I think I'm going to need a few. I managed a weak smile. Yeah, absolutely. I explained everything to the police, recounting the story Lambert had told me. The man who had died 6 years ago, the one they had thought was Brandon, would now need to be identified using dental records and DNA, since his real identity had been a mystery all this time. Later, I met up with Miranda, Officer Cross, just as she had asked me to call her. She had changed into casual clothes, and it was strange seeing her in jeans, a blouse, and a ponytail. We went out for those drinks, and as the night went on, I could tell she was struggling with everything that had happened. It was her first time using lethal force, and she had every reason to feel shaken. I stayed sober enough to drive Miranda home, then carried her up to her apartment. After helping her get settled, I gently removed her shoes and made sure she was comfortable before heading out. When Allison returned 3 days later, I sat her down and told her the whole story. Jess was still in the hospital, and with permission from the police, we decided to visit her. Walking into Jess's room was startling. The contrast of her pale skin against her red hair was striking. Her right leg was elevated, heavily bandaged all the way down to where her foot used to be. "I'm so sorry, Jess. Are you in pain?" I asked softly. She gave me a sad smile. "My right foot hurts, Ty, but it's not even there." I nodded, understanding. The doctor said they couldn't save it. There just wasn't enough left to reattach. "I've heard of ghost pain with amputations. That could be what you're feeling." Jess sighed, her eyes filled with regret. "I really messed up, didn't I? I dragged you into this disaster, and it almost cost you your life. I deserve what's happened to me. The DA isn't pressing charges. They think I've suffered enough." Allison stepped forward, her voice soft. "I'm sorry too, Mom. I hope you can make it to the wedding, but if you can't, I'll understand." Jess looked at the two of us, her voice quieter now. "Ty, I've asked Colton to pick me up when I'm discharged. He didn't know about any of this. He was just my driver and bodyguard. I was never in witness protection, and everything I told you was a lie, a way to win you back. You won't be hearing from me again." I reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "Goodbye, Jess." After that, life slowly returned to some version of normal. We focused on Allison's wedding preparations. I hadn't stepped foot in the garage since that day, but one evening, as I was grilling a steak, I noticed a car pull into the driveway. A striking woman stepped out, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a white blouse, a blue pencil skirt, and flats. Her badge and service weapon were visible on her belt. Recognizing her immediately, I walked over. "Officer Cross, it's great to see you." She smiled warmly. "Correction, Mr. Miller, it's Detective Cross now. And call me Miranda." "Congratulations, Detective Cross, or should I say Miranda," I said with a grin. "How about I throw a steak on the grill to celebrate your promotion?" "That sounds nice, but I actually came by to help clean up the garage, if that's okay with you," she said. "I know there's still tape and evidence markers in there. Plus, I'm sure you'd like to get it back to normal." We entered the garage together, and she started picking up the remaining evidence markers and yellow tape. Standing near my car, she glanced at it, admiring the shine. I figured this was the moment. She stood in front of the car, still looking it over, when I stepped closer, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. I turned her to face me. "I've been wanting to kiss you since the first time I saw you," I admitted, feeling my heart pound. "You're stunning." She smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." Then she added with a laugh, "And thank you for getting me home that night. I don't usually drink like that." "Miranda, you had every reason to," I said softly. "You handled everything better than I ever could have." We shared a kiss, deep, passionate. The tension between us melted away as we kissed again, and I could feel my heart race with every second. Grinning, I asked, "Detective Cross, have you ever thought about making love on the hood of a '69 Pontiac GTO?" She laughed, pulling out a small notebook from her pocket. "Funny you mention it, Ty. Number 1 on my bucket list, making memories on the hood of a classic '69 Pontiac." She playfully unbuttoned her blouse, revealing her bare skin as she leaned back on the hood of my car. I kissed her gently, savoring the moment. We moved together slowly and tenderly, completely in sync, relishing every second. Afterward, we lay there under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms. She gazed into my eyes and whispered, "Ty, I think I'm falling for you. I hope you feel the same way." I held her close, gently brushing her hair away from her face. "I love you too, Miranda." Stay with me tonight. This is real, and I don't want it to end. Marry me. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with joy. Let me check my list again. Yep, number 2, fall in love with the man of my dreams on the hood of a '69 Pontiac. And that's how it all unfolded. 5 months later, Miranda and I were married, and she proudly showed off her growing baby bump. Yep, we found out that night had given us a son. A year later, as we were settling into life as new parents, I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. It was a sleek Bentley, and Colton stepped out, carrying a briefcase in his hand. I called out to Miranda, who came into the room holding little Timothy Shaw Jr. in her arms. That's Jess's car, I said, recognizing the driver. Colton placed the briefcase by the front door, gave me a smile, a wave, and a quick salute before getting back into the Bentley and driving away. Feeling a mix of curiosity and caution, I brought the briefcase inside. When I opened it, my jaw dropped. It was filled with more cash than I'd ever seen in one place. Nestled on top of the stacks of bills was a note. It read, "My wedding gift to you, Mr. and Mrs. Shaw, and to little Tim Jr. wishing you long and happy lives. Jess lives. Jess."